I'm now recording this class on video, so for anybody that would like to re-watch it, I'm happy to send the link through to you. And if you can't make it to class, then I'm happy to send you the video instead. So they're both the same price and you get the same thing. You just, with the video, obviously it's not live, but you still get to stop it and pause it and do all those things, which in some ways is better. So welcome to today. And this is the Delicious Art Beginners online class. And we're painting this little scene today. So this is called Devil's Marble, and it's outback Australia. So landscapes is today's theme. And I'm just going to switch my screen over to my iPad so that if everybody can mute themselves if you're not already, and then you'll be able to see what I'm doing on the table here. So I'll just press all these buttons and get that working. So if you do have questions or anything during the class, please unmute yourself and speak up. You know, I do want everyone to participate, and it's really good if you do have a question. You're probably not the only one that has that question. So, you know, don't hesitate to ask and interrupt, because I'm more than happy to do that. And it could be hints and tips, could be questions about paper or anything. So please do that. Okay, so to start off, we're going to do a drawing with charcoal, and I use a little art diary, so it's a spiral bound A4 book. If you don't have one of those, then regular old drawing paper will be fine, even a bit of cartridge if that's all you've got. Charcoal, I really like to use willow charcoal for this exercise because it's soft, and these little Montmartre tins are quite good. You can get big, fat, chunky sticks. You can get skinny ones and all different widths. So for drawing though, I like to use a long, thin one like this. So that's what I'll be using mostly today, unless we do some shading, and then I'll use a shorter piece, but I'll show you how we do that later. So let's get started. You'll see on your image, on your notes here, I've sent through a colour version and a black and white version. So the black and white version is just to give us an idea of the tones in the picture. It's about looking at how light things are and then how dark things are, and finding those tones with the charcoal. It's also about getting familiar with the drawing. So you can see on here, I've gridded up the drawing, and you've got 16 sections in there. So you can actually, here comes Caroline. Lovely. Sorry, someone else has just joined us. It's good. Welcome, Caroline. And so we've just started. So we're just about to do our black and white charcoal sketch. Anyway, back to the gridding. So you can see that I've put a grid on the picture there. So I've broken it up into 16 squares, basically. The reason for that is to help us draw it. So there's lots of different ways to draw, and lots of people do it by eye. Some people do it by measuring, and the grid system is a really great system, and it's what I like to use, especially for classes. So if you draw up a section on your page that's around the same dimensions as your image, and I always do this really loosely and then end up having to rub half of it out. So if you want to measure it and be precise, you can do that. You could literally just measure this and convert that over onto your page, or just draw it loosely like I have. And then just, again, you can either measure it up with a ruler, find your halfway mark, and do your lines like that. So for the grid mark, I like to just do very light lines that I can erase later if I want to. Usually with pastels, you can just go over it with your pastel and it disappears underneath. Don't ever use a graphite pencil under pastel, because what that does is it shines through. So if you draw with a graphite or a lead pencil and then try to colour over it with your pastel, you'll always get this weird little silver shiny thing showing through. So try not to use graphite. They don't play nicely together. Charcoal is your friend at all times. Okay, so if you grid up your page like that, and as I said, if you want to measure it and be precise, that's fine. we will do that for the colour version, but for this version, I tend to try and stay a little bit loose and a little bit relaxed. And I like to hold my charcoal stick loosely on the end, rather than holding it tight like that, like a pencil or a pen. I like to hold it loose and just keep my lines kind of loose. So that, you know, gives you some freedom and helps you to sort of just focus on getting your lines and things in place without being too precise at this stage. All right, so I've got a grid marks there, and the other thing I wanted to say was, if I'm going too quickly and you want to catch up, just stop me. All right, so everyone will probably appreciate it if you do that. I'm happy to stop and, you know, wait for a couple of minutes or 5 minutes or whatever if you feel like you need to catch up, so don't hesitate to ask. So let's break this picture down. What I'm going to look for is where things sit within the grid lines and where they are positioned on the picture. So I'm looking at this big boulder in the front here, and I can see that the side of it starts about there. So it's about halfway down inside that square, I'm going to call it. I know it's not square, but we'll call it that. And then it arcs up a little bit, and then it crosses over on the other side about here. And then it arcs down, and it crosses down into this square at around about halfway as well. Can you see how that from there to there on that little line within that square, it's around about halfway. So that gives us a nice kind of curve when we join those dots. And then the next one comes down to about here on that grid mark. Can you see where that comes to that side there? So you've got a little gap there, and then you've got a much wider area here. So then basically just joining those dots too. They don't have to be perfect, by the way, because this is not a perfectly round rock anyway. And then it kind of wanders off into the bottom, and we can't see the base of it because there's grass there. So if you get those lines in the right spot, you're halfway home, really. So basically just join the dots, look at where they cross on the grid marks, and then draw your line, and you've got your big boulder already there. Easy peasy. Let's do the next one. So behind this big boulder, we've got a pile of 3. Here comes Kathy. Lovely. Welcome, Kathy. You made it. Wonderful. Great to see you here. So we've just started doing our charcoal drawing, and we've gridded up the image, and we're just working out where everything sits in relation to the grid lines. So I'm going to carry on. If you need me to stop or you'd like me to wait or anything, just yell out. But I'll keep chugging along. Okay, so on the back behind this big one, you can see there's a pile of 3, and they're the devil's marbles. And then we've got 1, 2, 3 other ones over in the background on the left-hand side. So what we're going to do is mark in where all those ones sit in relation to your grid mark. Okay, so let's look at the bottom one on the pile of 3 and look at where that begins behind our big boulder. So it comes across just below your halfway line, and then it goes down, and then it comes all the way down, and it doesn't quite meet that grid line on the left there. And then it too kind of goes down, and you can't see the bottom of it because of the grass. Well, you can't see it very well. And there's a little crease in that guy. Can you see the crease in it? That's about there. So that's interesting. That gives it another little dimension. So that sits about there. Then we'll look at the next rock that sits on top of that guy. So what I'm looking at now is the shape of that rock and where that sits in relation to the grid marks. And I'm going to take it around. It's like an egg shape, isn't it, on the right-hand side? And then it comes up, and it doesn't come quite as high. It's about 2/3 up inside that square. And then it's kind of flat. And then it comes down slightly more than halfway across inside that square, and then around and under. So goodness knows how that's balancing on there. I guess that's the mystery of this. But Isn't that interesting? What that shape is and how it could possibly be balancing like that. Must be the rock on top that's doing something with gravity. So that's that basic shape. And then we move up to the top rock. And so you can see that that starts just right of the center line, comes out, and it's not quite a point on the top, but it comes to a kind of a soft point, doesn't it? And then down, and it's almost as wide as the one underneath, slightly in a little bit, and then it dips down. So the other way to find those shapes is to look at the negative space. So if you can't find the shape by looking at the rock, look at the sky around it and see the shape or the gap between the rocks, or you know, what the shape is around the rocks of the sky rather than the rocks, and that's your negative space. So often negative space will help you find the shapes of something if you can't see it in the thing that you're looking at. So it's just another little way of figuring out where things sit. Okay, now we've done that bit, I'm just going to jump over into the background. So can you see there's a row of trees and then there's a row of grass right at the back there? And what we're going to do is just roughly mark that in. So those rows of trees, the tops of those trees kind of start just below that second rock where it meets the bottom rock. And it kind of wanders across. It's a little bit higher. We've got higher trees, then they go down and they go up and then they go flatten out. So it's kind of a line like that. Now, the nice thing about nature is you don't have to have it exactly right. So if one tree is a little bit too tall or short, doesn't really matter. The main thing is to try to be a little bit random with your marks so that you're not making patterns and everything's not the same size. So that's our little tree line. And then below that, we've got our line of grass. So when you look at this, in reality, the tree line is not very big at all. It's just a very narrow strip of green that runs across the page into that rock on the furthest left side. So that's our little tree line. And then we've got grass below that, which we don't really need to mark in at the moment because we've got to put those other rocks in. So once you've got the trees and the grass line in, and you can darken off the trees if you want to, just so you can kind of find them again. Sometimes it's good to block things out so you know where you are. So it's fairly easy to remember where we are in this one. Some pictures are more complicated and you need to find strategies to help you work your way around it. So now let's look at this little rock that's coming out from behind the big one on the bottom. So this guy's in the middle and it kind of comes across the top there. You can hardly see any of the grass line between where the trees and the grass are because the rock sits up in front, and then it comes down and disappears into the grass. So we've got grass down in there. Then we've got this other little rock poking up through there, just near the top of it. And then we've got a nice big fat one up here. So the one on the left, far left, sort of sits in front of our tree line and kind of above the other ones. And I can't see what's under that. Must be another rock or something under there. Or maybe it's sitting on top of that. Yeah, that's what it is. Anyway, that doesn't matter. All we need to be looking at really, I guess it does help to understand what you're painting, but the main thing to be looking at are the shapes and how they all fit in together and talk to each other. So if you've got a drawing much like that done, then that's pretty much all the information you're going to need to get started. Next, that's your main drawing, your basic drawing. I should have brought that tree line up a little higher. So you always find things when you look back and see it differently. Anyway, it'll do for there now. So look at the sky and just notice that there's a lot of blue and pink in there. So that's going to be quite beautiful to fill in later. And just as a little exercise now, we're going to just focus a little bit on the tones in this picture and use a short piece of charcoal. So I've just got a short stumpy piece there, which is a little bit fatter. than my long piece. And what I'm going to do is use that on its side to fill in some of the grey area in the sky. Now, if you want to take out your grid mark before you do this, then you can do that too. You can just use your kneadable eraser and remove the grid. I'm not going to worry too much because this isn't going to be finished art. It's just a practice of observation of tone. And so I'm just looking at the black and white picture and I'm determining how dark does the sky need to be in relation to everything else. And when you look at the black and white, you can see that the sky is actually the lightest section, really. Everything else is a little bit darker or much darker. So what I want to do is just blend in some of the charcoal in the sky, because what I'm going to then do is use the kneadable eraser to take a little bit of it off so that we can make some clouds, basically. So if you push your fingers in around that, so I've only got a very light coating of charcoal in that sky area, and I don't want to make it too dark because I want to save my darks for everything else, because that's where we're going to get the drama. And then blend around the charcoal with your fingers. So when you do that with willow charcoal, it just softens it all off and it makes it lovely and light. And if you want very dark charcoal, you're better off using compressed charcoal or pencils, because you'll get a much blacker mark, whereas your willow is very soft. Okay, so let's say I want to make some clouds in there. And I know the clouds in the picture are not much lighter than the sky, but they're a little bit lighter. So I can use my kneadable eraser, which is a wonderful thing. And you just shape the end of it. So say I just want a little fat round kind of shape in the end. And I'm just lightly rubbing it over some of that sky that I've marked in, and doing little soft little squiggly sort of marks to create a bit of a cloud effect. So nothing terribly definite. So it's very wispy, this cloud. And I'm just running it around where I can see some of that light wispy cloud look. And the harder you press with your eraser, the more you'll get off. So the whiter it'll go, because you're just going to be showing through the paper colour. And so that's a really nice way with charcoal, just to remove some of it and get a bit of white back into your picture. And then if you don't like it, you can just blend it all in again. So it's very versatile, much like pastel. So let's say that's our sky. And then we're going to move on and just have a look at the different tones that we can see in this picture. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on the charcoal study, but it is important to notice the dark and lights so that we can translate that into colour when we do the pastel. Okay. So I'm looking at this and I can see that that little tree line at the back is quite dark. It's one of the darkest things. And then the grass in front of it is about the same tone as the sky. So if I just lightly push some charcoal over that and then rub it with my fingers, that gives me the right sort of tone that I'm after. So tone or value mean the same thing. You might hear some artists talking about tone and others will say value. Mostly Americans say value. So that's what they mean. They mean light to dark and all the different greys in between. So it's just the same word, same thing, different word. Okay, so I've done my little tree line nice and dark. I've got my grasses about the same grey as my sky. Let's start on the left-hand side and mark in this rock on the left. So it's quite dark, and because it's a little bit further away, we can't see as much detail on that one. So I'm just going to darken the whole thing and make it reasonably dark. Just keep checking back at your black and white picture and you'll see that that is one of the darkest sections in the picture. You want to try and get that as dark as you can. Lovely. Then underneath that, I can see a bit of a dark sort of shade about there. That must be another rock that's sitting underneath here. Now, the other thing to think about while you're doing this is the direction of the light. So where's the light coming from and where's the shadow. So from what I can tell, the light's coming from above left. And I only know that because if you look at the boulders, say the top boulder in the pile of 3, you can see that it's actually darker on the right-hand bottom side, the right-hand side, and then underneath it is much darker. So if that's the case, that's telling me that the light must be coming from top left. So knowing that always helps with your art, because then you can figure out where to put your shadows and where to put your darks and your lights and make things really bounce around and pop. So sorry, I didn't even talk about colouring this in, but what I've done is darkened off that right-hand side of that rock at the top there with some charcoal, and that just gives me the nice little shadow side and tells me where the light is. And if you leave the left side unfilled and empty, then your white paper will show through, and then that's going to give you the light side of your rock and give it some texture too. So I'm just squiggling a bit of charcoal around there. You can see some creases and wrinkles and crevices and stuff in these rocks, and they're so much fun to mark in with your shadows and your lights. We won't spend a lot of time on that at this point because I want to get into the colour version because that's way more fun. So basically that's the top boulder. I didn't mean to go back over there, but anyway, we may as well carry on while we're there. And then same on the next one down. So they're all kind of mid-tone colours. They're darker than the sky though, aren't they? But we can make them lighter on the light side because that's going to create some drama. And again, you can kind of see on this middle boulder that it's darker on the right and then underneath. So casting a shadow on the one below it, as is the one above. And again, there's a lot of texture and bumps and things in there. There's a little dint on the bottom left of this middle boulder, so we can darken that off in there and give that some shadow, and that'll help us see how that works as well. I'm just softening off the edges with my finger. So if you ever want to just blur things off a little bit, just put your finger into it, push it around gently, and it kind of just blurs everything together. Lovely. And then we're going to colour in the one below that. So it's a kind of a dark to mid-tone. It's not as dark as the shadows, but it is a bit darker than the sky. So we can darken that off. And again, just blend that through with your fingers. And then we've got that little crease that we talked about earlier. So I can darken that off too, because there's going to be shadow from that forming onto the rock. And there'll be light as well. So make sure you leave your left side of your rocks light, because that's where the sun's hitting it, left top. And then that goes down. Kind of got this interesting shadow underneath here, and that's in behind the grassy area. So don't worry about the detail, just block in some dark under there. And that'll create some nice shadow and texture. And then back over to where we started before. So on this side, the rock on the side there. So it's also quite dark on the right-hand side, and then has a little kind of crevice on it, and then gets darker again. So this is how you can give things texture, by noticing the tones and the darks and the lights, marking them in and knowing where the light's coming from, because then you can make the light side brighter. I'm just dabbing it with my fingers to soften everything off a little bit. Lovely. And so we haven't got a whole lot of detail on there. We're not going to spend a bunch of time doing that. I just want to work on this, fill in the big boulder using my little chunky stick of charcoal on its side. I'm just going to fill that in loosely. And again, you can see that it's actually lighter coming down on the front there. And it's lighter than the one behind it, isn't it? So this is another thing to notice is as you go, looking at that and realizing that the edge of the front boulder is lighter than the one behind. So we need to make sure that that edge is lighter and sort of glows in front of it. That'll bring it forward and make it more defined. So anything that's closer to us will have more distinct marks and you'll see the detail, and the colour will be brighter usually. Okay, so I'm just looking at the shadows and things on this one, and there's not, not a great deal of information on this boulder, but the way we can say that it's turning or is a solid object is by where the light is and by marking in some of those little crevices and creases and things. And you can do that quite easily just with a few dark marks with your charcoal. And then take some out where it's too light or dark, sorry. If you want to lighten it up, just use your eraser and brighten up. I'm just brightening up that left side because that's where the light's catching it. And again, it's a fine line, isn't it? Because now that I've got the edge of this rock up into the sky is lighter. So it needs to be darker than the sky, and then that side needs to be lighter than the rock behind it. So always thinking about the tones and how that's all working together. So that could be a much sharper mark down through there. And then we've just got all this grass in the foreground. So literally we're just going to do grass marks. So what I've got, I'm just going to use my short bit of charcoal, put it vertical now, and then just literally run it up and down like this on your page. If you do that, you'll find you'll get lovely kind of different thicknesses in the grass, and it's a little bit more natural looking. And then once you've got that going on, make sure you've got the tones right, so it's darker down in there, darken off in there. And then again, just moving my stick of charcoal up and down. And so these are all techniques that you can use with your pastels as well. But that's why I like working with both, because they're very similar. Charcoal is much softer, but you can do the same kind of thing with pastels. And so I'm running this up and down through there, and that's giving me a nice kind of grassy effect. And then just to define a few of the grasses in the foreground, I can use my other bit of charcoal or just the end of the one I had before, just to get a few lines like that in there. That really helps to accentuate the grass. And what I'm doing is I'm holding it quite loosely. So grass is a whole subject really, and we will do a grass class. But literally just holding that loosely and letting it kind of flick over the page. And then just bring some grass across in front of this big boulder. And then if you want to get some highlights in there, so I can see there's a few blades of grass that are lighter, and I can just get my kneadable eraser and knead a little knife edge into it like that. And then I can use that and run that down through my grass and just get a few little highlighted ends of grass or stalks or stems, just every so often to break up the darkness and highlight some of those so the sun's catching the tips of those. And of course, when we do this with pastel, we'll use white or light, probably not white actually, very light yellow or gold to mark those sunny bits of grass in. So that's basically the drawing part of it. And if I've rushed ahead, I'm sorry. But what I do want to do is get stuck into the coloured version. and start drawing up the paper and the grid and everything for that. But it's a really good process to do this exercise each time before you start a painting, because you get to practice it. And practicing is really helpful because then you become familiar with your subject, and it's a whole lot easier to paint when you're familiar with it. So that was just a very quick little rundown on that. And now I'm going to start to prepare for the coloured version. So if you want me to stop or wait, I'm happy to do so, but if not, then I will carry on. So now I've got my little charcoal done. Make sure you sign it, put the date on there. Here's the date, 24.
Jeannie, do you want to see our charcoal ones at this stage and give us some tips to do before we go on to the next one, or not?
If you want to. Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, but we can do that, Lynn. So what I'll do is I'll flick back over to the other screen, and if everybody wants to hold up what you've got so far, then we can have a look at that. And yeah, wonderful. They look great. Very good, very nice, really good. So I can see some people, they're all different, and I can see some of you are more reluctant to go darker. So going darker is a thing, isn't it? You're kind of a bit scared to put too much dark down. They look great. Well done. Yeah, lovely work.
Thank you.
Lovely work. Well done. Very nice. Okay. So I'll go back to the other screen. And yeah, I found when I was first starting out, I used to be afraid of the dark, basically, and not want to, you know, put too much dark down in case I couldn't get it off again. And often you can't get it off. Those colours are very strong, and it is tricky to get dark off again. But at the same time, don't be afraid of the dark, because it's what creates drama in your art, and it's what makes it more interesting and eye-catching. And the same with the light. You need it. I prefer, I don't know whether you need it or not, but I prefer greater contrast in my art. So I really like darks and I really like light. Okay, what colour paper are we going to have? Mid-grey, terracotta, rose grey, or mid-blue? So anything will be fine, because we're pretty much going to fill it all up. I think I might go for terracotta today. I'll grab a bit of that. And the reason I thought terracotta is because it's similar to the colours in the picture. So it's got those beautiful reds and oranges in the image. So I think that might be quite nice. So you want to pop your paper. This is colour fixed paper, so it's quite gritty. I can scratch it. It feels a little bit like sandpaper. And I love it. It's my favourite paper for pastels because the pastels hang on to it really well. The other beautiful paper is pastel matte, but it's a little bit more expensive and it feels more like suede than colour fixed. But I have been using this for a long time, and it is my favourite. I just like how pastel behaves on it, and pastel behaves differently on all kinds of different papers. So it's just what you get familiar with and what you enjoy doing the most. So I'm going to grid up my page, and this time I'll measure it properly because, you know, probably better to do that. And I'm just using charcoal. So again, don't use graphite. If you have graphite in your pastels, just hide them from yourself. It's very easy to pick it up and accidentally use it because that's what we're used to doing. The other thing you can use is pastel pencil, of course. So, you know, if that's what you have, then that's perfectly fine too. I use charcoal in the classes and on the screen just so you can see it properly on the paper. If I was on a darker paper, I would use a light pencil. If I was on a lighter paper, then you can use your darks or a mid colour. So it's always handy to have a pastel pencil or two. you know, if you can only manage to get a couple, then just make sure you get like a white and a black and a mid-tone. A mid-tone would be like a rose color, or this kind of color, a terracotta or something like that. It's really good for drawing up your picture. Okay, so now I've got my grid mark on there, and we're literally going to do the same thing. We're just going to mark in where everything sits according to the grid. So I've got my picture next to me here, and I can see the grids, and I can see it in the black and white as well. So you can refer to either one of those, doesn't really matter which one you prefer. I like the color version better, but it's up to you. So let's mark in the grids again. So we started here, and I can see that with the big boulder, crosses over there, comes down to about there, and then onto the side, and then down under the grass. So that's our boulder shape. And if you go outside the lines or muck it up, don't stress, it'll come off really easily. So your charcoal's quite easy to remove, and that's another reason I like to draw with it, because I can take it off when I want to. Okay, and then I'm going to draw in the bottom boulder on the pile of 3. And again, that kind of comes down, just noticing where it crosses over on your grid lines, and then it comes into a pointy bit at the end. Looks like a bullet, really, a little bit. And it's got that little nice little crease in the bottom there, or on halfway down. And then we've got this lovely one that's balancing precariously on the top. So doesn't it help when you've already drawn this, because you just remember. And if you didn't get it right the first time, then you'll know what to fix this time. So I just think it's just so helpful to rehearse it. And then my top one. So notice the distance between the top of your picture and the top of this boulder. So it's about 2/3 up inside that grid. And it's not quite pointy, but it's got a little, like a tip on it. And then it comes down.
Just pausing for a tick?
Sorry?
Could you just pause for a tick?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
No worries, I can pause. All right, I'll carry on. Okay, all good. Thanks for asking, Michelle. And just continue to draw this up again in relation to your grid line. And if you can't see the end of something, then, you know, don't worry too much, because obviously that's part of the scene. and everything is just a shape and a colour or a tone. So that's basically the rocks all in one spot. There's a few little shadows and things down here in the foreground, but we can have a little play with those later on. And next thing we want to pop in just quickly is the tree line. And so again, the tree line and the grass line sit about halfway across that grid line there, just figuring out where things are. So that's that mark there. And then the tree line comes up, so up to about there. And that's basically all we need to put in at this point with the charcoal. So the next thing we need to do, once you've got that in there, is to start looking at the colours that you're going to use. I'm going to grab a sample bit of paper, and it's always a good idea when you choose your colours to test them out, or just put them onto a scrap of paper and see how they mix together, and also to check your tonal scale. So this is what I've picked for the colours. I'm just going to pop that on top of everything, cover it all up for a minute. And I've tried to put them in order of tone to a degree. So what I've got is I've got oranges there for my rocks. I've got blue and pink for my sky, and I've got some green for the grasses and the trees. Probably need a yellow, although that's a yellow, so I'll see how that goes. So when you're, just trying to figure out what colours to use, it's good to just test them on a scrap of paper and see what they do. So this paper I'm using is called Métiance. It's a Canson paper. You can get it in sheets or pads, and it's also a really nice pastel paper. A lot of people use that in preference to the colour fix. It's a little bit cheaper. And it has this like chicken wire kind of texture on it. So it gives a really nice texture, and you can blend on there. So you can actually blend all of that in and hide all the texture, or you can let some of it show through. So that's quite lovely to work on. And it's a good little practice piece. And then I've got some pink. So this is my light blue for my sky. And then I've got a bit of pink there. So just see how that looks with the blue, and what will that do when I put it over the top. And I quite like what's happening with that. So I'm going to stick with those colours for my sky. Next, I want to look at the colours in my rocks and things. So I've got this terracotta colour, which is very close to my paper colour, so you can hardly see it. But that's a good base orange. And then I've got a reddy orange colour, so it's a little bit darker. And that's going to be nice to give me some shadow and tone. I also have another darker, more brown kind of terracotta, not quite as red. It looks very similar though, so I might not need both of those. And then I've got a lighter orange, which is going to give me the highlights. So they're really nice together. And if you kind of blend them around, you can see how they're going to behave when you push them together. So I think that'll be okay. You don't have to do this on scraps of paper if you don't want to. I'm just showing you a little demo. And then I've got this lemon, or not lemon, I think it's an ochre, or ochre. And it's quite nice. So that's going to be lovely in the grasses, maybe a little bit in my rocks as well, for some light. It's quite a nice colour. And you'll find when you do, for instance, when I rubbed it into my orange, it picks up the colour that I've just rubbed it into. So then I put it down and it'll put down the other colour. And sometimes that's a really nice feature of the pastels, because you can kind of blend all the colours around and create some interesting colours. Sometimes it's annoying if you don't want to put the other colour into, what you're working on, and you want something more pure. So if that's the case and you have a dirty pastel from other colours, just give it a little wipe on some paper towel is really good for cleaning them off. So just have some paper towel nearby and you can give them a clean and then you get a nice pure colour again. So that's always a handy thing to have nearby. And the green. So I picked up this green, which is kind of a mid grass green. It's quite nice. And I've got a phthalo or a dark green. So that's going to be lovely too, just to get a bit of shadow going on. Mix them together and see what happens. It's good. And then what happens if I pop a bit of this orangey red into my green and get some really beautiful shadow colours. So that's really lovely too. That's going to make some nice shadow at the base of the rocks and around that area. So don't be afraid to play with some colours and mix them up onto paper and just see what you can create. They're really lovely. And, you know, obviously pastels mix on the page and not on a palette. So you've got to kind of try it out on the paper. Yeah. The other dark that I love, and I haven't chosen it yet, and I don't know whether I'll use it or not, but I'll grab it anyway, is the blue violet. So that's my favourite dark. And it looks like black, but it's not. It's got a lovely purple kind of tone to it. It's also very soft, so you don't need too much. And oh my goodness, that's just beautiful in there with the green and the red. Gorgeous shadows. So you can see how that's really going to give me some nice depth in under those rocks and in the shadow areas. So they're my colours that I've picked out. And as I said, I tried to keep them in order from light to dark. So I'll try that again. So I've got dark, dark. And if you kind of try to do that, then it really helps you with your painting to stay on track and figure out your tones. And always make sure when you do choose a palette or your colours that you have a good range. So you've always got to make sure you've got nice dark darks and lovely light lights, and then your mid-tones in the middle. I feel like I'm going to have to grab a yellow or something light for a few of those bright bits of grass in the foreground at the end. So I might just get a nice light yellow, give it a clean. So something like that. So it's a little bit more sunny than this yellow, a bit more golden. So that's going to be lovely for my lights, my grasses, just for some of the highlights. So I think that palette's going to work quite well. And as I said, it's nice just to test it out on your paper. So sky blue, light pink, bright, well not bright yellow, light yellow, got another creamy umber, an orange, a red orange, and then a terracotta and a darker orange red. Those two are similar, so I don't know, I might only use one. Then I've got a mid green and a dark green and a blue violet. So that's a nice range from light to dark. It's going to be lovely. All right, I'll pop that aside. Make sure you keep your colours nice and close by. And I've got a little towel next to me. So as I'm working, I'll collect dust on my paper. So what I'll do is tip it up onto the little towel and get rid of the dust because it gets in the way, sort of. Try not to blow it. It's the worst. It just goes everywhere. And the other thing I've got is a little hand towel, which is wet on one end and dry on the other. So you can clean your fingers off pretty quickly just with one little towel and then give them a wipe. Okay, so what we're going to do is work from the back to the front. And that's the way I like to operate with most of what I paint, so that we can get all the sky and all the trees and all the grass in the background first and then work forward. So you haven't got to try to get in behind stuff again later. So let's start with the sky, but first we're going to take out some of these grid marks because I don't want the black to get into the sky and make it dirty. So I'm just going to remove the grid marks that are in the sky area. And I'm just using the kneadable eraser. As you can see, it's coming off really easily because I only pressed lightly and it's I just did a very light mark with the charcoal. So if that was graphite, I don't think it'd move so easily. So I've taken all my grid marks out of the sky. Now I've got a big chunky blue pastel here. I think it's a unison or something. It's lovely. And I just don't want to break it because it's nice. So I'm going to see if I can work with it at this width. When you were covering a large area like the sky, you want to get your pastel and just wipe it on its side. So no matter what size you have, if you have a long stick, you might want to break it because you might find it a bit too long. But what I'm doing is just literally wiping it over my paper on its side. So you get a nice broad mark and cover a larger area. And I'm just going around everything. I'm kind of overlapping the rocks because what I don't want to have is a gap between the sky and the rocks. So just overlap them a little bit. You will lose your lines, but that's okay. We know where they are. We've done this twice now. So it's always, that's why we, do a little rehearsal, because then you remember. So I've literally just put my blue down onto my paper like that. Because it's quite a soft pastel and I've got the nice textured paper, it's left a lovely kind of gritty, grainy look. Now, if you like that look, you could literally leave your sky like that and just let it have that, painterly kind of look and let the paper show through, because that's one of the nice things about pastel paper is you can actually let it show through and use that as part of your art. It's lovely. But if you didn't want to do that, if you are a chronic blender like me, you might want to push it all in with your fingers. So what I like to do is just, I like to leave it unblended, but then it just bugs me and I can't help myself. I've got to get my fingers into it. But when you do put your fingers into it, make sure you pull it in a horizontal direction, because that's kind of the way skies go. I know that they don't go either way really, but when you think about a sky, it's wide, isn't it? And so you want to be doing wide kind of movements with your fingers to try and get the vastness of it. So if I went up and down, it'd work, but it just wouldn't feel right. So I always like to move my finger or my pastel around in the direction of the thing that I'm drawing or painting. And so by filling that sky in, now I've got this beautiful big blue sky and it's just lovely. So I'll just have a breather for a couple of minutes if you want to catch up with me. If you find when you push it all in, it might still be showing the paper through or not be thick enough or, blue enough, then you can always add more. And that's the nice thing about the pastel is you can just keep putting more on. And this paper will take about 6 or 7 layers, depending on what pastels you're using. But with your art spectrums and Rembrandts and those kinds, you'll find you'll be able to get quite a few layers onto your paper before it won't take any more. So that's a good thing. Good thing for us blenders who can't help but blend. So now I've got my blue sky down. What I want to do is put a bit of that pink in there. I can see that beautiful wispy pink cloud, and I think that gives it a lovely kind of sunset feeling, doesn't it? And it keeps it quite warm. So what I've got is my short bit of pink pastel. It's just a little art spectrum one. I've broken it off and it's just a little bit. And I'm just pulling that lightly across the blue. So just gently, gently looking at where the clouds are in the picture. And they kind of wisp out from behind those rocks. It's kind of this lovely light pink wispy clouds coming out from behind there. Now that you can hardly see those, but it will definitely add some warmth to the final picture. And it also tells us what time of day it is and gives us a feeling of the mood, I guess, or the temperature even. I don't know, is it hot or cold? I think it might have been a hot day, but now it's getting cooler. And then up the top, we've got those lovely wispy clouds up there. So literally, because we've got this beautiful gritty paper or textured paper to work on, the pastel just hangs onto it, and you don't have to do too much to really make it stick. And what I'm going to do now is just tip off my dust. So you can see there's a lot of dust gathered around here, and it kind of gets in the way, so it doesn't all stick to the paper unless you push it in. And that's why you need to tip it off sometimes, because it's distracting and you can't kind of see where things are. Now, if you wanted to brighten that up again, I'm just going to see what happens if I put a bit of yellow in here. It might go too orange, but let's see. You could warm this up a little bit. So even though the photo hasn't got yellow as such in there, you could technically add a little bit of that and maybe push it in a tiny bit with your pink and create a really pretty orangey color. You don't have to. All free will and up to you. You might want to put white in there or something a bit lighter. We all see different colors and different things, so it's up to you. But if you want to, by all means, go for it. I don't know whether I like the yellow or not. I'm going to go back over it with some pink now. And this is the lovely thing, you can just kind of play between the colors and test things out. And if none of that worked out, if I didn't like what had happened, I could literally just push it all in with my fingers, fill it up with more blue and forget about it. So pastels are very forgiving, and you can kind of make a lot of mistakes and then get rid of them. I think that's why I like them, because I'm not a perfectionist at all. Why I don't do watercolor. Watercolor is for those who plan ahead and are very particular about what they do, and I think it's a real skill. And yeah, maybe one day I'll find the time and focus, but not now. Okay, so if you've got some sky in there and a bit of cloud, you can come back and put more cloud in later if you want to. It's not going to interfere too much with the rocks and things, and so that's fairly easy to do. So next we want to pop in the row of trees at the back there, and as we said earlier, it's just a very narrow strip of green, really. So what I'm doing is using my mid green, and I'm just filling in a green row there, kind of keeping the top of it a little bit loose and random. So you'll find that smaller areas like this are a little bit more difficult to fill in because they're narrow. And if you want to get your finger into that, you can, and push it in. Just be careful that you don't make it too tall or smudge it off too much. The bottom section doesn't matter so much. We're going to go over that with the grass color in a minute anyway. But it's just that top bit where the trees meet the sky, and you don't want to, get it too high into the sky, because this is not a very tall row of trees. So I've used a mid green there, and I'm going to go over it with dark green now, just to darken it up. So the way I use pastels is I usually put a base coat or one color down, and then I'll pop another color over it and build up the layers. That way, I'm going to create a little bit of density in the trees. So now I've got my dark green, if you want to have a look. I'm just going to kind of blot it around, not put it everywhere. Checking back to your picture all the time and just smushing it around here and there, because what I want to try and create is a little bit of, I don't know, light and dark, I suppose, a bit of shadow. And you can see I've made patterns, which I didn't mean to do, but because I was holding the pastel in the same direction all the way through there, it's created this angled line. So if I want to break that up a little bit, I can come back, twist the pastel around and hold it a different way. And then we've got to get our fingers or a blender in there and kind of just push it off into the distance, because this is far away. So we don't want to be able to see too much of the detail. And what's happening here is, as I'm doing this, the dust is from the dark green is kind of getting up into my sky, which is not very good, and staining it a little bit. So you can see there's little tiny particles of the pastel dust up in my blue sky. And if I rub that, it's just going to get worse. So what I'm going to do is try to tip it off and hope it gets off. And if not, then I can patch it up later on with some more blue. But that's basically, see how I just put my fingers in there very lightly and push them around very carefully, because I don't want to blend it in too hard. And it's created a little bit of a shadow and light. So it looks like a cluster of trees. It looks like a big bunch of trees all sitting in front of them and behind each other. And that's literally just with 2 tones of green. So it's a mid green and then a bit of dark green over the top, scattered here and there. And then literally just smushed with my fingers, but not all over the place. And don't smush too much, because then you'll blend it all in and it'll all become the same color. And if that's happened, which is very likely because that's what I tend to do, just put more over the top. So go back in with your dark green. You could even try a little bit of this blue violet, you know, that lovely dark one that we picked up before. It's beautiful in green. I just adore how they behave together. And so again, I'm just dabbing that lightly with my finger, sort of gently pushing it around to create that little bit of foliage and density in the trees in the background there. And remember to bleed off over into your rocks. So you don't want to have halos or gaps around the rocks. You want to make sure we have that continuous line of trees and sky behind the rocks. So you'll have to overlap your lines a little bit. But that's okay. We know where they are. If anyone has questions, don't forget to ask. Just stop in about 5 minutes so that we can have a little tea break or a pit stop or a catch up or whatever it is you need to do. We'll go for 5 more minutes and then we'll have a little break, and then we'll come back and get stuck into the rest. So in this part, I just want to put in the grass area. So you can see behind the boulders and below the tree line is that yellow stripe of grass, and it's a kind of a straw colour. So that was this yellowy umber colour that I picked up before. And that was what I had in mind when I grabbed that. So it's quite light. And if you look at your black and white version of the picture, you can see that it's about the same tone as the sky, isn't it? It's the lightest section in the picture other than the sky. So you need a fairly light straw colour, yellow or cream even would work. So, and that's the other thing, we don't all have the same colours. So you've got to kind of work with what's in your palette. Sometimes it's not exactly right, but just try to get, if you can't get the colour right, try and get the tone right. So it's all about the tones. And, you know, even if you don't have anything like that colour, you could actually use some of the blue from the sky or something in a similar tone. So I've literally just wiped my straw or yellow coloured pastel across there. Again, I've gone over the tops of my rocks because I don't want a gap in between the rocks and the grass or the background. And it's just a very small area, that bright yellow section. So obviously the sun's catching that grass off in the distance, and it's a bit lighter. And if you look closely, I'm not going to try to look too closely, but at the back of the tree line on the right-hand side, you can see that colour up there too. It's like a hill or something. Now you don't have to put that in. You don't have to get too caught up in the detail. Shouldn't have mentioned it really, but anyway, it's there now. There's a few little trees poking up on the end there. So, you know, you can do as much detail or as little detail as you want with this. My main goal today is just to teach more about tones and shapes and some texture in those rocks and the grass. So that's basically the background all done pretty much. And then we're going to work on the rocks, and we're going to work from the back ones to the forward ones. So we'll start with the left-hand one and then work forward. But I will take a little break now if that's okay, and that'll give everyone 5 minutes or so to catch their breath or catch up, and we'll come back in a minute. So what is it, 2:07? So I'll see you back here at 2:15. That's 8 minutes. All right, see you soon. All right, so we're all back. Lovely, lovely. Looks like everybody's ready to keep moving along, so that's wonderful. And we've got our sky and trees and things in there. Okay, let's go. So we're going to start off with that rock over here on the left-hand side. And so remember, it kind of comes, I've picked up my dark, sorry, stupid phone, picked up my dark red pastel color. So it's similar to my paper color, and I might need to make it a bit darker, but we'll see how we go. And I'm just going to fill in the shape of that rock down on this side. So just putting that in there like that. And then we've got what looks like the top of the rock underneath it. So I'm going to fill that in as well. Now the reason I'm blocking this in like this is because I just want to get a bit of a base color to start with and build on. Okay. And I'm going to just focus on these 3 rocks down here and put the same base color down on all of them. Okay. So bring that one across there, and then we've got this dips down like that. Oops. This is where you think, oops, should have put more yellow for the grass in that bit there. And so you can, while we're still, you know, building it and moving forward with this, you can actually hop back in and clean up some edges if you feel like you need to do that. Okay. And then just blocking in those shapes there. So we've basically got 2 big rocks on the bottom and then that top one on the left-hand side. And so I can see that there's a little bit of kind of red or a darker brown, which I might need to go and find. I'm just going to try a bit of green in here because I think green and orange are quite lovely together. And so they've got a bit of darkness, and as we said earlier, the sun sits on the left-hand side. So what we're doing is darkening up on the right and possibly underneath a little bit. So this one, I think I've made this one a bit tall, but never mind. No one will know. That's the nice thing about nature. I mean, these are obviously recognizable shapes because it's a you know, an icon, an Aussie icon, the devil's marbles. But as long as you get it near enough, you don't have to get it exact. Well, that's my view anyway. I have to admit though, when I am working on a big painting or something that I want to exhibit, I will spend a lot of time getting it precise. But for these exercises, you know, it's best not to get too attached to being precise and just really more focus on the colours and the tones and what we're doing and techniques and so forth. I think is a much better use of our time during these classes. So what I've done there is I've put a bit of dark down on the right hand side of the rock, and I've used my blue violet. So that's my lovely dark one that is my favourite dark. And he is too tall. You can see that now, but never mind. And then I've literally just put some more of my red brown colour on the left hand side. So kind of just playing with layers and building it up gently, gently. And I've put a bit more dark down, and then I'm putting a bit more red over that. So what's happening is the textures kind of becoming apparent as I kind of mix my colours and choose. You have to choose where you put it. So for instance, my red brown can go on the top there where it's going to be a little bit lighter and there's more sun. And then the right hand side is going to be darker because that's where the shadow is. It's definitely way too tall. If that happens, so okay, I'll give you a demo on how to fix it. Let's hope I can. So looking at that now, I've gone up too high. So if I want to take this out, so it's really tricky because we've got a pale background with our pale blue sky, and I've got a dark rock, haven't I? So what I want to do is try and remove the top of that. Now I could just bumble on and not worry about it, but I'll show you how to fix things just for the sake of showing you. So I've got my kneadable eraser, and instead of rubbing it, because if I rub it, it's going to push it in to the paper. So what I'm doing is dabbing. And as I dab, the eraser is picking up pigment. And then I need to find a clean spot and then dab again. And so I'm going to keep dabbing until I can get as much off as possible. Because what I need to do after that is put some more blue down for the sky. And I want to try and have it as clean as I can so that there's no other dark colours underneath it to contaminate it. So I think that's got quite a lot of it off, probably enough to start fixing it up. So then I'll get my blue, and the top of the rock should come to about there based on, you know, how high it is above the tree line, etc. So I'll put a mark there, and I can just literally put my blue down over that, continue on it a little bit so it doesn't look like it's been patched up too much, and then just blend that in like that. And I've got to get my fingers into it to blend it in, so make sure they're clean. You don't want to put dirt or dark down in there. Push that in, and then voila, fixed. So it's really easy to fix things. That's why I love pastels. You don't have to be a perfectionist. Okay, so I'll just sharpen up that top bit there, and we can move on. So across the bottom here is also a darker kind of coloured rock, isn't it? The end bit there, which goes down inside the grass, has a darker end on it because that must be where the shadow is. So I've put some blue violet there, and I'm just going to push that in a little bit and pull it around so that we start to create a nice range from light to mid. And then I can see I've got a bit more shadow just in there, so I might pop a bit of that in there. This is all going to have grass in front of it at the end, so don't worry about the bottom parts where it's, you know, kind of not going anywhere. We're going to cover all that up anyway with our grass. So whatever you can't see at the moment of the rocks, then, you know, don't put too much energy into that because it's just all going to get lost anyway. It's just good to have a bit of a background colour underneath, so when we do put the grass down, it's got something in front of it. But it doesn't have to be too definite or strong. So I'm just going to put a little bump on the end of that rock. I can see it rises up a tiny bit on the top there, just so it's not a straight line and doesn't look unnatural. And then push that out with my fingers. So when you have a sharp, like an edge of your pastel. So for instance, when you draw, just do a little sample here for you. Oops. When you draw an edge like this, and you might want it to kind of be sharp on one side and then soft on the other, like I did on the rock there. So I want the top of it to be fairly sharp against that light background, and there's dust around that, so I can have to tip it off in a minute. But I can actually get the pad of my finger and put it down on the line like this and pull it across. You see that how that sort of blurs off one side and starts to create a really nice kind of shadow effect. So you can, you know, have a soft edge and a hard edge. And I know with pastels on textured paper like this, you're never going to get a really firm line. So you can see all the little dips and divots in that line there. And that's what pastel does on paper. It just doesn't, it's not fine, hard lines like you would make on a smoother paper. So it's just one of the facts of pastel that you have to accept, I suppose. Of course, there's always pencils. So pastel pencils are awesome too, and you can get a finer line with those. So you'll get a much cleaner edge with a pencil. And they're ideal if you want to be doing fur and eyelashes and fine lines like that. And again, you can still blend the pencils. So they work just as nicely as the pastels do. They are a little bit harder and not quite as creamy, but you can still get lovely effects with them. So pencils are your friend when you want to get into the pointy bits. But you will find with this pastel stick, you will never get a really sharp edge. And for my personality type, that suits me fine. I'm quite happy with that. I quite like the blurriness of it all. But it's all about learning how to use your fingers, the pads of your fingers, where to, you know, press down and pull and lift and all that sort of stuff. And it's similar to, you know, just having a different brush set in your kit and working out how to make your fingers do what brushes might. Fun. Okay, let's keep moving on. So hopefully you might have done a bit more without me while I was rabbiting on then. And so we've got the next rock here is again has some dark on the right hand side. So can you see how the pattern's forming now? We're creating shadows on the right, light on the left, and that's going to help to create texture and form. And so I've just popped a bit of shadow in a couple of spots there just to give that a few dints and divots. You can't really see a real lot in that particular rock, although I've just noticed there is a lighter section. So I might draw that in. So I'm just doing that little fine, pulling the pad of my finger thing down on the top of there. And I'm going to grab this light pastel. Might be too light, let's see. Just put that down through there. Can you see there's a little bit of a light edge on that rock? Not terribly bright, but it's definitely a lighter side. So if I pop a bit of my light pastel down there, and as I said to you, it could be too light, and it is, it's too bright. But once I push it in and blend it off a little bit, it's not as bright as what it is as full color. So this is the nice thing. So you could actually leave those marks as they are if you like that look, or you can kind of push it around and blend it in and soften it off a little bit. So you can change the colors quite quickly on the paper. Quite amazing, really. And of course, the more you push it around, the more mud you're going to make. So when I say mud, I mean your colors will go kind of murky and dirty. And often that's a great thing, especially if you're doing dirt and rocks and things. But if you want nice, clean, crisp colors, then you don't want to be pushing them around too much. So you've got to kind of blend a little bit and then stop blending. And it's learning all that stuff too. Takes practice, but you kind of figure out when to stop pushing it around, because it just gets uglier and uglier, and then it's more frustrating because you try to fix it all the time and you can't. So, and there will come a time when you can't actually get more pastel on the paper. So eventually it'll go, no more. You can't get any more on here. So you've got to stop. Okay, so let's move on to the next rock. I've got that one sorted. And now we've got this lovely big one. So I'm going to draw the edge of that one, and it comes down through there and in front of that one there. So see how we're working from back to front? So I want that one to sit in front of this guy and come forward. I'm using my orange coloured pastel for this one, and it's very similar to my paper colour, which is fine. I'm just going to block that in. When I say block in, I mean just colour the whole thing in with this colour, and then I can start to build up the tones with the different range of lights and darks. So that by blocking that in, that just gives me some pastel to start working with, to kind of push around and start to build on. Okay, so what I wanted to do is try and leave that edge there nice and sharp against the other rock that we just finished off, because that will then bring it forward and closer to it. And now I'm going to pick up my red coloured pastel, which is what I was using on the other rock. So it's more kind of brown or red. I'm just going to patch that around as well, because this is where we start to build up some texture and a bit of, you know, that rocky feeling. And we've also got that little split or that break through there. And so there's a little bit of shadow on the left side of that break. And so what I can do is pull my finger across, you know how I showed you just before with the pad of your finger, pull that across and create that lovely range of light to dark. So now it looks like it's got a crease in it. And because we've got the lighter colour on the other side, it looks like the light's catching it there. And so then I can add a little bit more of the dark around this on the right hand side and bottom side of this rock, because that's going to have shadow. So I've just smushed a bit of my blue violet on there with my finger, and I'm going to push that around just lightly. If I push it too hard, it'll get dirty and muddy and lose all its beautiful colours. But if you just go lightly, so always start light, and then if you feel like you need to go harder, you can. I always like to give myself space really to go lighter or harder if I want to, but start light first. Just start carefully, tread lightly until you're sure. What I did then, I picked up my lighter apricot coloured pastel, and I just did a little bit of light down through there, because what I can see is happening is the light's catching on that side of the fold in the rock, and we've got the shadow going down into it. So I want to lighten up this bit here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull that across with the pad of my finger so that it softens off one edge, and it's very subtle then. Nice subtle little shine or a glow. And then see on top of this rock, there's the shadow from the one above it. But to make the shadow darker or stand out, let's lighten up the top of this one a little bit first. That'll give us a bit more drama. So again, I used this one, apricot kind of colour, just smushed it around on there lightly. And again, lightly rub it in. Don't press too hard. Just let your finger run over the paper. See how that creates such a lovely texture. And then looking at that, thinking, oh, I need a bit more light just on this tip here, because that has to be catching the sun on the left-hand tip of this big rock. It has to, because the sun's coming from top left. So that's got to be lighter. And all those little nuances will then help to make, you know, the shadow here and the light there and so forth. So all those things help. Okay. So now I'm going to draw in the next rock. So that's this middle one up here. So we've got to remember the shape, and because we've still got some grid on there, we haven't filled it all out or taken it all out yet. So I can still find the shape of that rock. And the lovely part about this rock is the little bit of sky and tree line you can see just underneath it on the left there. So it's about the shape of that one, I think. And may as well do this one up the top too while I've got this pastel in my hand. And so again, you know where it went because we did it before. Make sure that you have enough sky behind it that you're not going to have a halo or a gap around it. There we go. So that's the shape of those two guys. And so now we can fill them in and start to work on their shadows and creases and things as well. Cool. So I'm just going to fill that in with this pastel. Colour it in basically. Sometimes you can use the side of the pastel depending on how big the thing is that you're filling in. Other times you can use the end of it or the tip. And so I'm just doing the side for the most part. Where I want to see the edges, I'll just use the tip so I don't make sure I go out of the line. So that's the only risky thing, I guess, is working darker on a light background like this, because you'll get a lot of dust and you could accidentally stain the sky area. Okay. And so remember to tip your dust off because it does interfere, get in the way, and tip that off. So they're basically just the one colour at the moment, and it's that reddy brown colour that I used on the other ones previously. Now I've picked up my terracotta, so I'm just going to start to kind of blend this around a little bit. And once you've started to do that, you can kind of just then push it in with your fingers and then put more on and start to really accentuate the different colours and tones in these. So I've got a bit of that down on there. Now I'm going to rub it all in because I want to make sure I fill these up and get them nice and rich with the pastel. And again, watch the pad of your finger when you get to the edge to try and not smudge the edges. So what's happening is I'm pushing a lot of dust off to the edge there, but that's okay. I can tip that off. So I just want to push it all in and get it nice and thick, because once you've done that, then you can start to just lay colour over the top without having to blend anymore, and use the pastels themselves to describe the texture of things. Okay. Still can't believe that rock sits there like that. It's quite amazing. So it does need to come a little bit more square across there. So once you've got that pushed in and you've got some colour on your paper, a bit of a background, and you can start to kind of just, my colours are not different enough to really stand out. Giving it a nice kind of undertone using these two terracotta colours, but they're a little bit too close together and you can't really tell the difference between them. So I'm going to put my light one down first and pop a bit of light on the left side. So you can literally just wipe your pastel onto your paper like that, and you don't have to do anything else, and it picks up the texture of the paper. So then it looks like, the rock, and it's awesome. So I literally don't need to do too much more to that. I could put a little bit of shadows and creases and things in there, but essentially the pastel and the paper themselves are doing all the work and giving me this beautiful rocky texture, which is what we want. And it kind of happens by accident sometimes. You just kind of wipe it on and go, oh, that worked. How lucky. So, and then now I've got some light on there. I'm going to pop a little bit of dark down on the right-hand side. Remember, the right side is in shadow and underneath. So the underneath of these rocks is also in shadow because it's casting a shadow. And it's dark in there, and it's also dark just on top of the one that it's sitting on top of, because it's also got shadow being formed from the rock above. So this is when it starts to get, you know, interesting, because you kind of start looking at it and thinking, okay, if the light's there, the dark's got to be here. And I can literally just wipe some dark on and then gently, 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 gently just push it across. And see how it's getting some formation in there already. And then see those little, there's little creases and lines in there. So what I can do is literally just pull my pastel around on its side. This is a very short, stumpy bit. But use a pointy bit or a sharp edge and just run that around in the shape of the line that I can see in that rock. And hopefully that will kind of start to look like a bit of a shadow or a crease in the rock. And just noticing where it's light and dark. So, in the different shapes. And then I can just softly dab around with my dirty finger, which is putting more dirt or dark down, but it's kind of giving it that lovely texture as well. So it's very delicate. You know, you don't want to press too hard. You don't want to rub too hard. You just want to go gently until you kind of find the sweet spot. So it's a bit of a playing around with your lights and darks, and understanding too where the light and dark is. So see there, I've just drawn a dark line, a broken line. So it's not a hard, fast line. And then I've popped a little bit of this light apricot colour. I just literally touched it on there and then lifted it off. And that's already just brought that bit of rock or that piece there, it's kind of brought it forward so it's catching the light. And that's probably enough texture on that one. It's close enough to it that I'm going to be happy to move on and get the rest of this done. As I said earlier, if I was going to, you know, put this into an exhibition or anything, I would spend a lot more time refining it and getting it as perfect as I could. But I do like to get things finished in classes, and I think it's more satisfying if you can, you know, sit there at the end of the class and look at something and feel like you've accomplished it and finished it and you're proud of it. So I don't want to, you know, spend a whole bunch of time on one little bit and have you feeling dissatisfied. So I'm working on the bottom rock now, and similar kind of process. So the right side is darker and the underneath is darker, and it's casting shadow on top of the other rock that it's sitting on top of. Sit on top of twice then. So I'm just putting a bit of dark here and there, and I'm going to kind of gently push that in with my fingers again. I just want to get a bit of pastel down first, then I've got something to work with, you know. And make sure it's really dark where the rocks meet. So you might want to even try black if you've not used black yet, because you can't get blacker than black. And sometimes it's good to save that for last, where you really want super dark. So just working on, and there's a little shadow on top of the rock below. So I've got to make sure we put that in there. And, you know, as I said before, don't always blend. Don't kind of rub too hard. Just dab things in gently so they just sit on the surface and do what they're supposed to do. So there's a little dip on the bottom of this middle rock on the left, bottom left there. There's a nice little dark spot just there. So you could darken that up and just dab it lightly so that it doesn't, you know, get too messy and get stuck in the sky. And then again on the other side, so I've put a bit of blue violet down here and there, and now I'm just going to kind of manipulate it around with my fingers. I don't want to blend it in all spots because then it's going to just get muddy and dirty. Whereas this way, I can, you know, have light sides and dark sides and different parts that sort of work together. And then pop a bit of light on the light side. So don't be afraid to, you know, go a little bit lighter than you might dare to, just because we're going to create, we want to make this interesting and we want to see where the light comes from. And it's nice to have the, you know, the bright bits as well as the dark bits. I'm going to tip off some more dust. You'll find as you tip the dust off, it'll sort of land on the page on the way down, basically. So because I'm tipping my dust off to the left, I'm getting bits of dust all through my sky here. Now, later on, I can dab that off with the kneadable eraser, or, you know, you could go over it with more blue and try to clean it up. But it is an issue with pastels. And that's why if you're on an easel and you're standing up or you've got your board upright, it's better to work from top to bottom, because the dust drops, and then as you work down on the painting, you kind of just blend it in automatically, and then it doesn't kind of interfere with anything you've done previously. So that's my second rock, and they're starting to come alive, aren't they? They're looking like they have some substance. I think my shape's a bit off, but we could, and that's the thing, I always sort of go a little bit smaller than I need to, so that if I have to get bigger, make this wider or something, and I've got sky or something like that behind it, it's easier to start smaller and then make it larger rather than the other way around. Okay, so next we're going to move down onto this big one at the bottom. So that's this big boulder in the corner. There's not much that's terribly distinguishing about that other than the little crease on the left, and it's got a little bit of texture on the top, but the front of it is fairly light. So I'm going to start light there, and we can actually go a bit darker if we need to, but that will bring it forward and make it look like it's closer to us. I'm going to put a bit of light there with my apricot colour, and then get my terracotta and just do an edge around the top. So draw that back in again. Make sure you've got enough sky behind it. Oops, just got a big crumb there. Sometimes if you press hard with your pastel, it just crumbles on the paper and we end up with a big blob. And then just fill all of that in. So I've got my lighter colour on the bottom of this big one, and then I'm going to put my terracotta colour across the top there, and then I'll stick my fingers in it and push it all in, so we've got a nice base to start with. So what I want to do is create a nice, you know, foundation, I suppose, to build on. And when you're blending it in like this, so just kind of move your finger in the shape of the rock. So you can see it goes in different directions, really. There's all different textures and shapes and things. So you can kind of run your finger around loosely in those directions. So I kind of like to try to move my finger in a random way for things like this. And I'm literally not lifting it off the paper. So if I keep my finger on the paper, I get a continuous mark, and it kind of then keeps everything flowing nicely. If you keep lifting off and putting down like that, what happens is you get the same mark everywhere, but you're picking up color off the paper and then you're putting it back down. So if I keep doing that, it just does that, and it gets really annoying. So if I keep my finger on the paper, I'm kind of carrying the pigment around everywhere I go. And it that way you're not putting fingerprints in everything, and you're getting a much more continuous sort of flow. And I'm just doing little round movements. I'm going across. I'm kind of running around it in different directions and trying to keep my movement random, because what I'm trying to create is that texture of the rock and the natural look of it. So that's already starting to look like it's got some lights and darks happening because of the way I was moving my finger. Of course, I've got dust everywhere. I have to tip that off again. Might tip it off the other way this time so it doesn't get in the sky. And so I need to refine the top edge of that where it meets the sky, just so I don't have any blue showing through. I'm going to use my darker red pastel, darker red terracotta one, just to get that nice sharp line, because that's one of the nice things about this picture is the crispness of the rock against the sky, and the blue on the orange is lovely too. And so if you look at the picture, you can see it's got sort of darker colours on the top, and then the light's catching this front left side, so it's a little bit lighter, but there's still, you know, blotches of darker brown and reddish colours. So I'm just going to blotch my pastel around like that, and again it's catching the texture of the paper, so it's picking up that nice gritty texture, which is beautiful for rocks. This stuff, it's really nice. There's also a crease or a crevice down through that section there, and so we can have a bit of a play in there and create a bit of shadow and light as well, which will make it more fun. I can also see, I don't know whether you can see it or not, but there's like a green sort of tinge at the top of this rock. So I'm going to pop a bit of green in there, which is my grass green. So that's my mid green. But if you wipe that lightly over the reddy brown colours, it kind of makes this really nice muddy, earthy colour, which is rather lovely, I think. So, you know, you'd be surprised what happens when you mix these things together and what you can create. And I really like what that did. So don't be afraid to try different colours. If you kind of look at your palette and go, oh, blue, I wonder what blue does, try it, see. You know what else would be really nice in there? A bit of purple. Yeah, then I have to go and get some purple now. And so I'm literally just lightly running my finger around on top of this rock. Sort of, I've got some different colours on there now, and just sort of smushing them in and trying to create some of that textured look. So you don't want to cover the whole thing with every colour. You just want to kind of blot it around. And refer back to your reference photo all the time. I know you're looking at what I'm doing, but check what you're painting from, because that's where all the information is. That's the part that's going to tell you, you know, what colour to put where, and the tones and all those things. What I'm seeing now is at the bottom of this big rock, there's some dark. I mean, there's not a lot of dark because there's grass there, but I still want to create the feeling of it kind of turning and getting dark underneath, because that's what we've done with all the other ones. So I've popped a bit of blue violet in here, just lightly with and just rubbed it on. And now I'm going to start to kind of push it up into the rock a little bit so that I'm going to get a nice gradual blend of the rocky colour down into the dark section, because then we can put some grass in front of this. So my crease is a little bit hard. I've put a little dark line there to give that bit of shadow. So it needs a bit of light probably on this side here, on the right of the dark side. Bit of light down through there. See how that created a shadow or a bump? So I can just softly, again, pull that in from the edge with your finger so that you get that nice, very subtle little glow along the edge there. And remembering too, remember looking at the rock behind this guy, it's darker. So this one has to be lighter. Got to stand in front of the one behind. So if you lighten up that edge a little bit there, it'll bring it forward. And if that doesn't work and you feel like it's not working and you know you've done the light thing and it's still not coming forward, then we need to send the other one back. So that one behind it, where they meet, I need to darken that off a little bit back in there so that this new one, this front one, can sit in front. And so sometimes you've got to get back into those tricky bits and, you know, darken or lighten something off so that the other thing will glow. So I've had to put a bit more dark back in there, and now I can lighten this one up again, and that'll bring it closer to it. I'm also going to smush around a little bit more light, get some more texture happening in there, and that's starting to work nicely. Cool. Might just put a bit more terracotta down in here. See, as I run that over, you can see all the colours underneath, but it's also creating this really nice glow, I suppose, on the top. Give my crease a little bit more emphasis. And again, pull that out from the edges with your finger so you get that nice tone, and then lighten this up again. So see how you just keep kind of dancing between the light and the dark to move things around and bring them forward or push them back, whatever you need to do. That's a bit too bright now. Soften that off a bit. Looks like a big bottom. Huh, I didn't know I could draw those. There you go. We'll have to pop some grass in front of it.
Juicy peaches.
Isn't it? Feel the cellulite there. Oh, so funny. It's amazing what you don't realise what you're doing until you look at it and go, what? How'd that happen? Oh. Anyway, I'm just going to review my other rocks now and see if they need anything else before we put all the grass in, because once that grass is in there, it's going to be tricky to get back to the rocks if you need to change anything or adjust anything. So just check it. You might want to run over them with a pastel again and get a bit more texture going on. Review the shape, make sure that you know you've got the right angles and things of the edges of them and so forth. And don't worry about the bottoms of them because we're going to pop grass there in a minute. I might take my grid marks out. Not that that matters too much with the grass, because we'll cover it all up. Okay. So let's see, what colour have we got in the grass? We've got a bit of green. This umber colour, which is lovely. It's like this, that straw colour, and then green. I'm just playing with this. I'm just going to see what happens. Put them together. Probably want a bit of dark green as well. So there's a bit of dark down here in the foreground. Pop a bit of that over in the other ones as well, just to get some continuity. So if you're going to put a colour in one spot, it's often good to kind of put it somewhere else as well. It doesn't have to be obvious or really bright, but it is good to make sure that, you know, you kind of repeat it or have it in other places. I've just noticed the bottom of this big rock here on the left side, there's a bit of a dark patch in there. So we need to darken that off. And there's also dark down in here. So let's just get your blue violet and block in some dark around the bottom here. That way, when we put the grass down, it's going to have a nice, you know, black area to pop on top of. So I've literally just put a bit of blue violet down through here, and I'm going to blend that in because I had my dark green there as well. So now I'm going to push them in together, and that'll create a nice deep base for the grass to grow from. And then over on the other side, I've got a bit of dark green in there too. So I'm just going to smush that around a little bit. What I'm doing is building up a nice base to get the grass on top of. Okay, tip off some more dust. I might tip off that way now, so it goes off at the bottom instead of into my sky. So see how the green and the blue violet mix down here? They make the most beautiful shadows. I just love what goes on with those colours. It's so beautiful together. And they're just divine. When you are doing landscapes and trees and bushes and stuff like that, those colours are just magnificent together. They really create the most lovely depth. All right, so we're ready to make some grass. So what we'll need, as I said before, I might have to find some more colours, but I'm going to start off with some green. Now, remember at the beginning when we were using our charcoal, and I said hold it loosely on the end. So that's what we need to do now for grass, is to just hold your pastel loose. If you've got a longer one, or even pencils are perfect, then that's going to be better. You'll get a lot more movement with a longer stick. If you've only got a short stick, like this short stick, for instance, it's very short, you can still do the same thing. Just use the sharp edge of it and try to keep your movements random. So it's about finding the edge of the pastel or the end, and then doing these random kind of movements. So I kind of flick it, I guess that's the best way to describe it, is just flick it around. So you don't want to be making the same mark at the same size right across the page. You want to try and keep it really loose and natural looking. And we need to start at the back, or the back of the grass area, which is closest to the rocks. So what we're going to do is start back there and come forward. And as we come forward, we'll fill up the grass area and build on top of what's already there. So at the back, underneath the rocks, they're shorter there. We've got sort of shorter bits of grass coming up through here, and across different colours. So it's not all the one green either. So you need to kind of alternate between the colours a little bit. And what did I say before? This lovely straw coloured one is really nice, because that kind of, it ties in with the grass in the background and helps to build up, you know, the different tones in there as well. So you need to start at the back, at the base of the rocks, and then we'll come forward. So put them in first, And it's mostly green back there. I'm going to put a bit of blue violet in there too, just for fun. If you feel like putting red or blue or whatever in there, go for it. Why not? You can make this yours. Green, red is actually really nice with green. Let's try that. So this is the red I've been using on the rocks. It's like a terracotta kind of browny red colour. It's quite lovely. So red and green are complementary colours. They always work really nicely together. So whenever if you want to do landscapes and trees and stuff, always pop a bit of red in there. It'll warm it up and make it more interesting and give you lots of lovely depth. Okay. So now I've got that row of grass in the back there up against the rock. So now we want to come forward and start to build it up in the foreground. So it's kind of like two rows, I suppose, of grass. So I'm going to use this reddy one as a base and just start to put a few loose marks. Again, same kind of gesture, flicking it around. Vary the length of your marks and also the direction. So, even though they're all kind of up and down, some are swaying slightly to the left or the right. So you just want to kind of try and make it look as natural as you can. So that's the red, and then I'm going to come back in with some green. I know most of this grass in the front is that straw colour, it's lighter, but I'm going to build up with the greens and the reds first, so then when I put the lights in, I'll pick up a little bit of the other colours, and these colours will make a good base. So flicking takes a while to grow grass. You either love it or you hate it. I love it. Don't forget to do the odd long one, that sort of comes up taller than the other one. This kind of random bits of grass. And now I can come forward with my lighter strokes. So this is my light, it's not my bright yellow. I might use that to lighten up a couple of these, but it's the lighter colour that we used in the grass in the background. So it's a little umber kind of colour. And on the left there, you can see most of this grass is this colour. It's more a straw, kind of a straw colour, isn't it? And then there's grass in the centre that's darker. So this straw coloured stuff sort of all fits to the front left. And to get different marks, you can press a little bit harder. So for instance, here I'm pressing a bit firmer there, so I'm getting a harder mark. And that just makes it glow a little bit more, doesn't it, in amongst all the other ones. So, and don't be afraid of broken lines either. So you can do a few little dots like that just look like they're catching the light. Don't do too many though, because if you do too many, it kind of saturates it and then it loses its wow factor. So got some of this colour over in front of my big boulder as well, my big butt. And see how we just managed to fill up that whole area with bits of grass. And we didn't need to put rocks and everything else in there. So it's just all worked out quite nicely, really. And then, as I said, if you want to add some little highlights, I'm going to try this bright, lighter yellow, see what happens. I might not like it. Let's see. Just put a bit of that through there. That's quite nice. So it's a little bit lighter than that straw colour that we had. And it's just adding a few little bits of highlights in there. It's nice. So that brings it forward. It makes it closer to us. And you feel like you can touch that now because it's got texture. And you can see where the light is. It's sort of hitting the tops of the grass and the left side of all the rocks. and casting shadows on the right. So once you get to this stage, I would call it just about finished. But you could, you know, if you wanted to keep working on it, then you could add more darks and grab a pencil, for, you know, for, like this, for instance, and blacken off under here if you wanted to darken that off to get, you know, really strong contrast going on, which is rather nice. Do the same under there. You could even darken off in there. You could put some more contrast down through here with pencils. So pencils are great for grass and things like that. And pets, especially, or animals, I should say. If you want to do animals and dogs and stuff, pencils are perfect because you can get all those beautiful fine lines and fur and hair and things. So I think that might be just about it for today. I'll give you a couple more minutes and then we'll have a look and see how everybody went. Bit of show and tell. And just remember not to overwork it. That's what I'm doing now. So, you should stop there, stop right there. Or maybe I could pop a bit of yellow on my rock and see if that lightens things up a bit. That's fun. So, oh, that's nice. So you could, you know, try things like that with a bit of highlight, bit of fun. I always like to save the light for last. You've probably heard me say that a million times now, but if you save your lightest colour for last, then you can, you know, put some highlights on and really create lovely contrast. And it's really nice. I want to put yellow everywhere now. Stop it. Yeah, sometimes you've got to just stop it.
That's odd.
Oh dear. Magnifique. And don't forget to pop your name on it too. So just give it a little signature. And that way, when we pop them onto the newsletter and Facebook and everywhere, you'll know which one's yours, because sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you can't tell which one's yours. I've had people say that before. You see them all go up and think, I don't know which one was mine, because they all look similar. But they all look different too, which is the fun part. Everybody's is different. So I've got to stop fiddling with this now. I'm just going to tip off my dust for the final time. And there you go, a page of boulders. All done. So for the sake of the recording, I'm just going to close up now and finish. So I hope that was a great class. I hope you enjoyed painting those, the devils, marbles, and Australian icon. And if you'd like to share your painting with me, that would be awesome, because I'm very happy to pop it onto Facebook and share it on social media, because people love to see what's been going on. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.